Hello, my name is Melissa Manning. I'm Director of Content for CI Live and S&P Global Commodity Insights. I'm pleased to be here today with Dan Colliver. Dan is Associate Director for Global Engagement and Intelligence for Oil and LNG at S&P Global Commodity Insights. Dan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We are going to discuss today the 40th anniversary of the Platts Dubai crude benchmark, and Dan is going to give us a little bit of perspective on that benchmark and its significance to the industry. What can you tell us about the Platts Dubai crude benchmark?
Certainly. So the Platts Dubai crude oil benchmark is really the primary pricing reference for physical crude oil, which is delivered from the Middle East. And then it's used for pricing oil exported from the Middle East, also from Russia, the US Gulf Coast, Mexico, and other parts of the world, to refiners, particularly in Asia. And it's existed, as you mentioned, for over 40 years now. And it's really been around since the spot markets emerged in the early 1980s.
Well, that seems quite like quite a long time. And what kind of what basket specifically of crudes does that include, Dan?
Certainly. So the Platts Dubai crude assessment really right now reflects the value of medium heavy sour crude oil loaded in the Middle East. And it's upon convergence, the buyer, when they're willing to accept the physical delivery of either Dubai crude oil itself, which it's named after, or we also have what's called the alternative delivery mechanism, which means that the seller has the optionality of delivering to the buyer either Dubai crude or alternatively Oman, Upper Zakum crude oil, Al Shaheen crude oil, or Murban crude oil, and that's all in the seller's option.
I see. Does those crudes originate from a particular field historically, or is it a regional collection of crude then, it sounds like?
Yeah, so those grades are all produced around the Middle East, around the Middle East Gulf. It gives over 3.5 million barrels a day of loaded crude oil. And some of them are produced in the same country, some are produced in other countries. So you have Dubai crude oil, which is produced in the United Arab Emirates, in the Emirate of Dubai. Oman crude oil, which is produced in Oman, and it's Oman export blend. So that's their main crude oil grade. It's a blended crude. That's their main grade that they export. You also have Upper Zakum crude oil and Murban crude oil, which are loaded and exported from Abu Dhabi. That's one of the Emirates of the United Arab Emirates. And then you have Al Shaheen crude oil, and that's exported from Qatar. So you've got a few different countries putting in their crude oil into this benchmark.
So it truly has regional representation then. That's quite significant. Tell me then, for the folks who may not be familiar with crude grades, when we talk about sour crudes, can you explain that a little bit more? What does that mean?
Certainly. So there's a few key characteristics when you're looking at crude oil, and people talk about sweet and sour and heavy, medium, or light crude oil. So when we look at this crude oil, this is essentially medium heavy sour crude oil mostly. So medium heavy is the weight. It means that when you refine it, it gives a greater yield of medium to middle distillates and heavy residues, which can be upgraded. So the heavy residues people can upgrade to make transportation fuels. And then when you're talking about sweet and sour, that literally is if you taste the crude oil, that's the sulfur content of it. So you've got sweet crude, which is essentially low sulfur, and then sour crude, which tastes sour. If you were to taste it, that's a sour crude. So that's a higher sulfur content. So most of the crude oil produced around the Middle East is what we call a medium heavy sour crude oil. Of course, you could contrast that with something like WTI Midland from the shale play in West Texas. That is a light sweet crude. So that's a low sulfur content, and that's density. So the density is when you talk about light, medium, heavy. So the density of those crudes is lighter. So it's just different ways that people look at crude oil.
So and thank you for that that background there, Dan. So those crudes are optimized, I guess, for Asian refiners, or that's one of the primary markets, I suppose?
Definitely. And what you can see is in recent years, there's been a huge amount of investment in Asia, particularly in China and India, for new refiners. So those new refineries have made huge, multi-billion dollar investments in having high upgrading capacity to be able to process these medium heavy sour crude oil. If you've got a simple refinery, you can process light sweet crude oil, doesn't need that much upgrading. Whereas if you're taking a medium heavy sour crude oil, you upgrade it, so you essentially are buying a cheaper, heavier crude oil, but you're upgrading it to create those high value transportation products. So that's where, when people have looked at in the last 5, 10, 15, 20-year investments, the investments they've made is to be able to process those more economic crudes, and that investment has largely taken place around Asia. We can see really the rise of Asian refining, and essentially certainly a decline, structural decline in Western refining as well.
Well, so those markets are uniquely tied together then for this particular crude benchmark. Tell me, if you will, Dan, what do you think about with this anniversary? What does the benchmark mean in terms of its significance to the region, both from an export perspective and also to the Asian region as an importer?
Yeah, so this benchmark really plays a critical role in pricing crude oil. And it's not just in the Middle East, but also from further afield coming into Asia. So the Platts Dubai benchmark is the leading price benchmark for Middle East sour crude oil. You can look around the region and you see this benchmark is used by producers in the Middle East, and, as you mentioned, refiners in Asia. So when you look at producers in the Middle East, the likes of Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, Qatar, Kuwait, every day they are using the Platts Dubai benchmark to price their crude oil exports when they go to Asia. Then when you look from an Asian perspective on the refining side of things, the Asian refiners are using those Platts Dubai benchmarks as an integral part of their refinery calculations when they're looking at the economics and calculating their margins, because they're looking at what is the price of Platts Dubai relative to the refined products that they're making. And when they know that spread, that tells them what their margin is going to be. So this is a critical part of the global economic sort of hydrocarbon sector. And then furthermore, Platts Dubai also plays a key role as one half of the Brent Dubai spread. So of course we have Platts Dated Brent, which is our benchmark in the North Sea in Northwest Europe, and that's a sweet crude benchmark. And then you've got Platts Dubai, which is a medium heavy sour crude oil benchmark. So that provides the barometer for understanding the relative value of sweet on the Brent side and sour on the Dubai side, which really helps people understand where they want to move their oil from and to in the global oil refining system.
Well, that's interesting. You get to, I guess, obviously, then you've got a balanced view of both ends of the spectrum, if you will, in terms of crude grades.
Definitely, and that's the point, right? So you want to know where the Western price is, you're looking at Platts Dated Brent. You want to know where the East of Suez price is, you're looking at Platts Dubai.
Awesome. So Dan, I guess, 40 years seems like an awful long time, but clearly it's been beneficial to the region to have the Dubai benchmark. Tell me, what do you think the future holds? What do you see going forward?
Well, I think the future really remains exciting. You have rising crude oil production in the Middle East. People are certainly not the end of oil in the Middle East, and certainly not the end of oil in Asia. People need transportation fuels. They need these fuels, to move things, to keep the economy going. And within the Middle East, they continue to produce a huge amount of crude oil, and they continue to look at Platts Dubai every day as that leading benchmark and a reference point for their crude oil sales.
Wonderful. So you're going to be talking about the benchmark, I suppose, next week at the Middle East Petroleum and Gas Conference. Is that correct?
Definitely, and look forward to meeting anyone that wants to talk about it there.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Dan. We appreciate your time and good luck at the conference.
Thank you very much.